This is Judaism Unbound, episode 34, The Snapchat Rabbi. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofus.
And we're here today in the second episode of our arc on what Jewish looks like today with Sandra Lawson. She is a rabbinical student at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. She has so many descriptors that it's hard to know where to start. According to a recent article in the Jewish telegraphic agency, JTA, she's described as an African-American, lesbian, vegan rabbinical student who also was a former military police officer, converted to Judaism when she met a Reconstructionist rabbi in Atlanta and was intrigued by what he was doing. She goes on to describe herself on her own website as a sociologist, personal trainer, food activist, weightlifter, writer, public speaker, guitar and ukulele player, and she's absolutely all those things in addition to being known as the Snapchat Rabbi. She's really found a way to use that particular technology to share Judaism and her brand of Judaism with a wide variety of people all over the world. In addition to that, she brings Judaism through all kinds of other contexts in more of the physical space, and we are just absolutely thrilled to talk to Sandra Lawson today and understand where she's coming from and where she's bringing Judaism to. So Sandra, thank you so much for being on Judaism Unbound. We're really excited to have you today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So we're talking to you as part of this series where we're looking at folks who come to their Jewish lives in, let's say, we've called it, non-Ashkenormative ways, or, in ways that, sort of Jews that are, let's say, atypical from the vision of what a Jew looked like or who a Jew was that might have been the operative vision at some of the key points of the evolution of the Judaism that we've received. I guess as a way of getting started, it would be great to hear you describe your own identity and your own way in which you see yourself coming into this whole project.
The short version is I grew up primarily in a non-religious family. Both my parents have Christian backgrounds, but religion was not really central to our upbringing. And around my mid-30s, I met a guy named Rabbi Joshua Lesser, who became a really good friend of mine. He's still a great friend of mine, great mentor. And he introduced me to Judaism. I fell in love with their synagogue, wanted to be a member of their synagogue, and then eventually wanted to become part of the Jewish community and started doing some social activism. And here I am as a rabbinical student. I know that's really short, but feel free to ask me questions.
That's sure. Well, just out of curiosity, what is the time frame between when you first began to be interested in being Jewish, then when you became Jewish, and then how long did it take to get you into rabbinical school?
I think it was very gradual. I mean, it was quick but gradual. I had a lot of friends who had already thought that I was Jewish. So I think I met Joshua Lesser sometime around 2001. And I finished my conversion process in 2004. And during that time period, I would hang out with him, spend time in the synagogue. I think like December 2003, I had a long conversation with him about converting. I like to tell people that it wasn't so much Judaism that I was interested in. I really liked that synagogue. Like that synagogue to me was amazing and awesome. And it wasn't until I started studying as part of my conversion process that I understood that was Judaism. And what I was actually attracted to was not just the synagogue, but Judaism. So I converted in 2004. And in 2011, I entered the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College.
And what did you do during those middle 7 years?
So in 2004, I started a graduate program in sociology. I went to Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, got a graduate degree in sociology. I was working as a personal trainer. When I finished my graduate degree, I started doing research. I was a research investigator for the Anti-Defamation League.
And so you entered the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in 2011, and you're still a student.
Yes.
And so, it's funny because I'm a rabbinical student, and people often assume that means like, oh, you're studying all the time. But I'm sure you're also, and I've read that you're also involved with Jewish leadership right now, even though you're not a rabbi yet. And I'm curious if you could talk about some of the various projects, communities that you've served since you've been at RRC.
Most of my professional training as a rabbi has been focused on chaplaincy and working with seniors. It's something I didn't realize that I was naturally drawn to, and it was a skill set that I wanted to cultivate. So I've been seeking those types of internships.
As you've been serving these various communities and even just in your own personal journey, so there's so many intersecting pieces of all of our identities, but I'm curious, have any in particular, LGBT and racial identity, which is really crucial to talk about in the Jewish community, are any of those coming to the surface in these communities in a positive way? Are you able to channel those pieces for particularly great learning? And are there any roadblocks on the other hand that come up due to those?
So yes and no. Like when I came to RRC, which is a shorthand for the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, I really thought that I wanted to be focused on social justice. And I realized that those are skills that I kind of already have. And I was an activist and an advocate in my 20s and my early 30s. And once I realized that those types of internships related to more social justice stuff weren't really skills, they're important to me, but they weren't skills that I needed or wanted to cultivate, then I started to focus more on what do I need to learn as a rabbi? And when I'm working with seniors, the biggest thing that they really care about is that someone is there. Someone is there to be a witness at this stage of their life. So yes, there's a few challenges. I'm often mistaken for a boy. They're confused sometimes, like, how are you, a rabbi, rabbinical school? But once we get past all of that, which doesn't take very long, they really do see me as their rabbi because I am their rabbinical person.
I mean, I'm not actually sure, completely where to start here in terms of asking questions. So I'll ask you to describe your vision for, let's say, your rabbinate going forward and or the Jewish future that you see yourself as becoming a part of after graduating from rabbinical school. Because, there was a Jewish Telegraphic Agency article about you that came out, but the bottom line of it was you had a new, an uncommon vision for what the Jewish future should look like. And I'd love for you to describe a bit of that.
I lead services in a community known as it's Lansdale, Pennsylvania, and it's a small community of Jews that love Judaism. They are like what the Pew Research study was talking about. They love being Jewish, they love Judaism, but synagogues and JCCs are just not attractive to them. And they want to learn and they want to do Jewish, but they don't know how to do it. And so through conversations with an owner of a cafe, I've been leading services there once a month. And it's been great. It's been great for me. It's been great for them. People just show up as they are. I bring my guitar, I have some sandals on, and we jam and we sing, and then we do Shabbat, and then we eat and sing some more. And it's just great.
How would you kind of bridge what you're seeing there and the kind of, I'll call it fretting, that we hear a lot from the organized Jewish community about lack of participation, lack of affiliation? I mean, what is it that you think you're finding? Like, what would be your message that you would want to put out more broadly that would lead to other people taking the approach that you're taking?
The days of creating a building, expecting people to show up, I think are over. I think they're gone. That doesn't mean that to throw the synagogues out. That doesn't mean that we don't need rabbis, but we have to be more creative in how we reach the Jewish community. I have a classmate, since we're on a podcast, but I have a classmate who just created a podcast called Kaddish. And I'm not sure where she's going with this, but the Kaddish is our prayer for mourning. But that's an amazing, innovative way to connect with people. I have fantasies sometimes of being in the streets of Philadelphia and starting a Shabbat service and just seeing who shows up, or being in a cafe and like I'm doing right now, leading services. And another thing that I'm doing that we sort of talked about earlier is I'm doing a Snapchat Torah on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat, which follows the Torah laning cycle. And so far, I've gotten pretty good feedback on it.
And could you say a little bit more just to describe what that is?
So on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat, I look at the Torah portion for that week. And I try to find, in a Snapchat kind of way to create a story. And the last Snapchat that I did was on Pinchas and talked about the daughters of, I can't even remember their names, Ziliphat. And talked about them and, how they demanded change, demanded their place and demanded their right to own their father's property. And that's really progressive and radical considering how few times in the Torah we actually hear women's voices.
And these are videos that you put out on Snapchat?
They are, but so the way Snapchat works is you create little 10-second videos or pictures, but there's a storytelling element there. So you can put these together and create a narrative. So just to backtrack a little bit, I love technology. I'm a tech geek, but it took me a while to come around to Snapchat. I could not figure out why so many people were on it. I had uploaded it and downloaded and uploaded and got rid of it, whatever, back and forth, back and forth. And then I just finally just started doing some reading, because I just don't like it if I don't understand a piece of technology. If I understand it, I don't like it, that's one thing, but I just could not get it. And I just jumped in one day and I was like, oh my God, this is really, really cool. And the number of people who are, in their 20s and 30s that are on Snapchat, it's a wonderful way to connect with people. So what I did was, I'm making these little stories, but then I also wanted to figure out a way to share them when the cycle ended, because they only last for 24 hours. So I initially tried to download them onto YouTube, but the voice and the sound didn't match. But then, thank goodness, Snapchat did an update which allows you now to save these stories. So then I save them, and then I can then upload them to YouTube and to my Facebook page.
Great, and we'll link to some of them in our show notes.
Thank you.
But let me ask you, I want to come back to this technology stuff, but I also want to backtrack to what you were saying earlier about the days of people, I forget exactly how you put it, but the days of people just showing up and are over, and I'm curious why you think that is. I mean, do you have an analytical sense or a sense from talking to people, why won't they show up in old school Jewish spaces and activities, and why do you think it's necessary to do all these new kind of approaches, to be out in the streets, to be in cafes? Why is that?
So I think there are lots of answers, and I can share the ones that I've heard. I mean, I do think I do think we still need synagogues, but I think that rabbis have to change. Long before my time, you could build a synagogue and that people would come. Today, that's just not attractive to a lot of people. You had a guest on your show that talked about the average cost of membership. And if people only go to synagogue twice a year, that's kind of expensive. And there are I think synagogues are incredibly attractive, especially to people who have young children and they want their kids to have a traditional Jewish education. But today, Jews, especially younger Jews, express their Judaism in ways that are just different from back in the day, 20 years ago or 10 years ago. I'm not sure, but they just express themselves differently. And I've met people who own their Judaism, strongly identify as Jews, but for whatever reason, they just do not feel the need to go. Now, some of the conversations I've had are that synagogues are too expensive, they're not welcoming, it doesn't speak to me, it's too hard when I get off work, and then I have to go get dressed up, and then I have to go here. I mean, there are so many different reasons, and also I think there's a lot of competing interest. We live in a culture where Jews have basically assimilated predominantly into, the larger, and I'll just say this, larger white culture, and there's not maybe not as much of a need to go to a synagogue to feel Jewish, but I continue to meet young people who most of their friends are Jewish and they want to connect with other Jews. So how do we figure that out? How do we find ways for people that want to connect to Jews? How do we make that happen?
And what have you found, just anecdotally, what have you found that feels to you like it's working, that does address the needs that those folks have?
The Shabbat services that I'm leading in a cafe started from a conversation. The owner of the cafe had realized that I just came back from Israel and was so excited to talk to me about being Jewish. I kind of thought he was Jewish, but didn't really know that he cared that much. And he was just talking to me about what he loved about Israel. He lived in different kibbutzim when he was there. He's 70 years old now. And then I had a conversation with his daughter and this is a sad story actually for me. His daughter, she's in her 30s. When she was in her 20s, I'm assuming in her 20s, she found this synagogue or the synagogue reached out to her. The dues was really expensive, so they gave her a scholarship. I'm using scare quotes because I just hate that term. As it relates to paying to go to synagogue. So they gave her a scholarship to be a member for a year. She went to the synagogue. She loved it. she loved the music, and she really loved the challah. Like she had 2 Jewish parents, but she didn't really have this kind of experience growing up, and she loved it. But then the scholarship ran out, and I don't know the synagogue. I don't know what happened. All I know is her story. And when the synagogue when the scholarship ran out, the synagogue wanted full dues. She still didn't have the money for it, so she stopped going. However that conversation happened, that synagogue missed an opportunity, because now Maya is happily married, has 3 kids, and has a 10-year-old daughter. And she wants her daughter to have some kind of a Jewish education, know something about her Jewish heritage. And so when she met me, we started talking about this, and that's how our Cafe Shabbat started. The funny thing, though, is even though Maya really wanted to do this for her kids, now she lets her kids do whatever they want, because when she comes, she gets more out of it as an adult, because when her kids are there, she's in mommy mode and she can't really focus. And she loves it. So this started out just for her kids. Now she loves it. She's internalized it, and she will, I believe, now take what she's learned and educate her kids.
It reminds me, we've actually, I think, linked to this article once or even twice at this point, but there was a Kveller article a long while back, and it was by Nina Badzin, who is a friend of Judaism Unbound. And the title was something along the lines of, "I'm Jewish for myself, not for my kids." And I'm bringing it up again, not to just, belabor a tired point, but because I think it's important. I think what you're saying about how adults can find that beauty in whether it's Judaism, like the big ism, or particular specific forms of Judaism, like your Cafe Shabbats, it's possible, and it's real. And once we sort of move away from the constant paradigm of just Judaism for continuity's sake, we start to find that. And so it actually brings up a question I had based on a quick reference you made before to intermarriage and how the established Jewish world relates to intermarriage. And I'm curious if you want to comment a little bit more about that and how that manifests and what its effects are.
So I come from a synagogue that was founded by gays and lesbians. And over the years, after a while, because they founded the synagogue because it's Congregation Bet Havarim in Atlanta, Georgia. And the synagogue that was created because they wanted to do Jewish, they wanted to participate, they wanted to have a religious experience, but they wanted to be able to bring their whole selves as gay and lesbian men and women. And so they created Congregation Beit Havarim. After a while, some intermarried people who were looking for synagogues found the larger Jewish community completely unwelcoming to them. So intermarried couples started connecting with Congregation Beit Havarim. And this is also true for a lot of other gay founded synagogues. And so the Congregation Beit Havarim had a conversation about how open are we? And so they welcomed intermarried couples. So here's a gay founded synagogue that was not welcomed by the larger Jewish communities, welcoming other people that are not welcome in the larger Jewish community. When one of the first intermarried couples that came, they had children, but the place had no Hebrew school. So the non-Jew Jewish partner, the mom in this case, started the Hebrew school.
Wow.
Okay. I'm going to flash forward because I could talk about this for a long time. That now non-Jewish mom is now the lay cantor of the synagogue. She's Jewish now. It's now the lay cantor of the synagogue, and her oldest son, is in rabbinical school with me. Okay. So what I'm saying is that I believe we have done as a larger Jewish community, a really horrible job of welcoming intermarried people. And often synagogues will sort of lightly accept intermarried couples, really trying to get the Jew in and not really looking at the non-Jewish partner. And synagogues that do it well look at the whole family, the whole couple. But intermarriage rates, as you know, which you should not be surprised by, are I'm sure over 50% now, which means intermarriage is here to stay and continuing. When I still to this day am shocked when I see articles that say, we're losing Jews because of intermarriage. I believe we're losing Jews because Jews who have non-Jewish partners and want to do Jewish stuff find roadblocks and gatekeepers when they go to Jewish institutions.
Not too long ago, Bill Clinton was speaking at the Democratic National Convention, and they played that old clip where he says, there's nothing that's wrong with America that can't be fixed with what's right with America, right? And, I'm sort of thinking like, right, there's nothing that's wrong with Judaism that can't be fixed with what's right with Judaism. But yet it requires a certain kind of person to, Lex and I have talked about the chutzpah versus knowledge curve, the idea that somebody has to have sufficient knowledge to know what's wrong and what's right with Judaism that can fix what's wrong with Judaism, but maybe not so much knowledge as to think that there's only one right way to do it. And they have to kind of maintain that chutzpah. And at the end of the day, I'm asking if you think that you just think about your own experience, that you are just a extremely creative person who, never takes the way things are as the way things need to be in any other walk of life. So why should you take that in Judaism? Or was it, something in particular about your Jewish education and your Jewish, like you talked about the way of entering into Judaism, that in the communities that you were part of, that even though maybe you're not that way in many walks of your life, you actually were brought into Judaism in that way, and you came in with that spirit.
I go to school with an incredibly diverse group of people, some who love traditional Judaism and don't want it to change, and some who want to be more innovative. And I think for me personally, because no matter what I do in the Jewish world, I'm Black, I'm brown, I'm a vegan, all these things, I'm never really going to be at the center. I'm always going to be sort of seen, whether I want to or not, 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And so a person like me, working with the Jewish community to connect to the larger world, I find that for people, especially who don't like synagogues or don't like traditional Judaism, they see me and they're like, oh, wow, this is a rabbi I can relate to. This rabbi looks like me, or this rabbi acts like me, or what kind of rabbi are you? And so, but I think I don't know if there's a type. Rabbinical schools, have their way of figuring out who belongs and who doesn't. I think my school, they take the best candidates and teach them from where they are and then watch them grow. When I came to rabbinical school, was primarily focused on, one, Hebrew. How do I figure out this Hebrew stuff? Wanting to learn more academic, traditional Jewish stuff. And then I got those tools, and then I've taken them and have been more creative as opportunities have come along.
Shifting gears to the realm of technology, another topic that Lex and I have discussed a lot on the podcast over time is how technology may affect the Jewish future, positive ways, negative ways. I think very much in my view, the technological times in which we live are very analogous for sure to the time of the development of the printing press, and that absolutely revolutionized Christianity. I think also had a very significant impact on Judaism. And I would surmise that the shift to writing on scrolls was also very significant in terms of shifting the nature of Judaism from being an oral tradition to a text-based tradition, etc. So there's certainly a lot of precedent for technology having major effects on the world, and I don't even have a sense that we've even really begun to struggle with that within today's Jewish community. I mean, some folks are using technology, but I feel like those deep questions, like what will happen if the effect of technology is analogous to the effect of the printing press, I'm not even sure that we're talking about that yet.
So one of the things that I want to do, and one of the things, a little side project I have, is I've been working with rabbis, and I want rabbis to use technology to connect with people. I want them to use technology to share their stories. I want them to use technology to give information. I think progressive Jews, and when I say progressive Jews, I'm basically talking about non-Orthodox Jews, have been really slow with using, the different forms of social media and the different forms of technology we have. And I think communities like Chabad embrace these forms of technology. Talking earlier about how I use Snapchat, when I started using different types of social media like Facebook and Twitter and now I use Snapchat and I use YouTube or whatever, I am constantly running into Chabad people on these platforms. I'm not seeing a lot of non-Orthodox rabbis use these technologies. And so I would like to Google, for example, women in Judaism and see something other than an Orthodox reference to how women's roles are in Judaism. And I see Orthodox definitions or links to those kinds of questions because they use social media, which moves them up in the Google search or the Bing search and I understand there's some, fears and concerns about putting yourself out there, but also for me, social media is really attractive because even though it may be hard to tell, I'm more of an introverted extrovert, so I can be on and I can lead services and I can sing in front of people, but the way I recharge and get my batteries going again is by spending a lot of time with myself and reflecting and things like that. So social media has been a really good way for me as an introvert to connect with other Jews or connect with other people. And so I use technology to talk about my Jewish journey and my rabbinic journey. And I also have, other platforms where I just primarily talk about whatever I'm just interested in. And sometimes they cross connect and sometimes they don't.
I think of the recent launch of Pokemon Go.
Oh my God.
Yeah. My fiance is super on top of Pokemon Go. Occasionally she's left in the middle of dinner to go catch a Scyther or something. I saw a thread on JedLab, which I've referenced a couple times before on the show, which is this Facebook group for Jewish educators. And somebody had initially posted within a few days of when it first came out, horror of I'm speaking in hyperbole, but this was how I read it a little bit. Horror of horrors, our synagogue is a Pokemon Go is a Pokestop in Pokemon Go, right. And all these people are coming to our building and catching Pokemon, should we be worried about security? What do we do? How do we handle this? And I was initially so discouraged because we talked about before, congregations don't have this problem very much with streams of people wanting to come into their building, even for whatever purpose, whether it's Jewish related or not. So it seems like the reaction to this should be far more positive. We've got a whole ton of people coming, maybe some of them Jewish, maybe some of them not, whatever. That's great. But I was actually really encouraged because people responded that way. People said, wait a second, this is good. Later in the same Facebook group, a guy posted this really awesome Pokemon Go themed live action game to play at summer camp that was maybe very loosely related to Judaism, but it was just a summer camp game that you could play at a Jewish summer camp or another one. And so I'm encouraged about that, but I so agree with you that we're lagging behind Orthodox compatriots for sure. And it's not just that's sort of a trivial thing about, who comes up first on Google. For people who are curious about Judaism and they search women in Judaism, like you said, or LGBTQ and Judaism or whatever they search, almost always, unless they're really digging, they're getting an Orthodox answer, which is a Jewish answer, but it's not necessarily the Jewish answer. And for many of us, it's not the one that we want to be the most common among folks who are curious about us. So it's not just, semantics.
Actually, just on a note, it's nothing to do with Judaism, but the Interior Department's Snapchat account, a few days after Pokemon Go came out, their park rangers were in parks all over the country, not just playing Pokemon, but also introducing people to their parks. So that was I thought it was awesome. I was like, oh my gosh. So okay.
No, but that's the point. I think that a synagogue, right, might say, not just it's so great that we have people in the building because that's uncommon. It's even a step further is to say, whoa, what an opportunity this is to put on some amazing programming that would get those people to want to come back when Pikachu isn't present. the fact that that isn't the first thing that pops into people. Look, I mean, obviously, like security is probably the first thing that should pop into your head, but the second is probably how to take advantage of this opportunity. But it does seem that often the reaction is this is a problem rather than this is an opportunity. I'm wondering if Lex and I have talked about the idea that the Judaism that we have inherited did not evolve in an environment where there were going to be a lot of people interested in becoming Jewish. We've talked in different ways that one of the strategic needs for Judaism today is that it has to be something that is choosable, right? It has to be something that people will gravitate towards. It has to develop a gravitational attraction. And those are just not things that it has a whole lot of experience with. So it's interesting to think again, like, can your typical old school synagogue develop those technologies? And of course they can, but is it reasonable that they will? Because so many of the people just are conditioned to it a different way versus, like you talked about, the gay and lesbian synagogue, which didn't come out of that environment and needed to have that sense of attractiveness right away, because probably there were a lot of gay and lesbian Jews who didn't really particularly want to come to synagogue. And so right from the beginning, they're saying, how can we sort of put that value proposition out there? And so it's a different kind of environment. I'm wondering another thing, though, so in this day and age, as somebody who converted to Judaism, and I'm wondering whether that notion that we sort of has kind of been embedded into the way that a lot of us think about Judaism, right? That Judaism doesn't seek converts. Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. Well, sometimes I think of that as like, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that wouldn't have me as a member, right? In all these centuries where nobody wanted to be Jewish, it like makes you feel better to say, hey, we wouldn't want them anyway, But now in an environment where there actually are a lot of people that may well want to be Jewish, it's always felt to me that we may need to fully divest ourselves from that sort of point of pride that Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. I'm just wondering how you think about that kind of stuff. I mean, should Jewish communities be much more active or a little more active in actually affirmatively seeking out people who might want to convert to Judaism as opposed to, being more tolerant of it, let's say?
So different communities, one of the things I find interesting is that definition of proselytizing. So I've come across communities where just advertising in a paper is proselytizing. Like, we're a synagogue, we're here, come join us. There are communities out there that think that's crossing the line and that's too far. And then, of course, this whole thing about actively reaching out to non-Jews. I think the Reform movement right now on their website is doing a really good job of giving people information about how to convert to Judaism. My rabbi, Joshua Lesser, when I was in Atlanta, he was getting calls daily from people wanting to convert. And I think because he was just out in the community, not just the Jewish community, he was always out there. And I don't know how many of those people actually did convert or didn't convert, but he's just a welcoming guy. Like, he invited me as his friend to his synagogue. I'm not sure he knew or even cared or even thought that, 10 years down the road, I'd be in rabbinical school. I'm sure that wasn't in his thinking. He probably just wanted to share.
If it was, he's a genius.
Yes, right. He wanted to just, share what he does with his friend, which is me, which I'm gratefully honored. I'm honored that he did. I personally am uncomfortable with going out on the street and proselytizing how I imagine some non-Jews proselytize, or I don't want to say any names, but, just, giving them pieces of paper and, or whatever. I don't want to do that, but I do want people to have access to information. So by using Snapchat or Facebook, I've had non-Jews reach out to me and say, oh, thank you so much. My sister converted. I never understood why. Now I have a little bit of understanding about it, because I did a Snapchat Torah on our kashrut laws, why we eat the way we eat. And that has helped a lot of people to understand their Jewish friends. And it's also helped some Jews that I've run into understand their own relationship to food and their own relationship to the kosher laws. I personally don't see anything wrong with advertising connecting with people, talking to people about Judaism. My line in the sand is, actively on the street proselytizing. But I don't want to keep what I do secret. Like, I love Judaism. God willing, I'm going to be a rabbi, and I want to share what I've learned with anybody who wants to listen. So that JTA article that I was featured in, I think this is like the third interview that I've had from that article, which has been really, really exciting. But one of the reporters asked me, how do I know when I count a minyan? How do I know who's Jewish? And I don't exactly remember what I said to him, but I said, I have to operate under the frame when we're starting a service that everyone is Jewish there, even though I know they may not be. Because what I don't want to create is an environment of us versus them, or someone feeling like an insider and outsider. So I often don't know when people come to my services, because they're completely open, who's Jewish and who's not. I have to operate under the frame that everyone is Jewish so that we can do the things that we need to do. When the service is over, just from talking with people, I find out who's Jewish and who's not. Once I know for sure, then I'll make different choices, because those people have shared those things with me. But what I don't want to create an environment where somebody who's new to Judaism or new to the community feels like an outsider. So somebody comes in and they may be Jewish, but then somebody says, oh, you don't look Jewish. Well, there you go. It starts right there. And so I'm more concerned, not necessarily about numbers, but I just want everyone to feel welcomed. And I think when that happens organically, I'd like to believe that the community grows.
I think that's a really great perspective on the inclusivity, and it raises an interesting sort of side note, which I want to emphasize and bring out, which is that in a sense, you're saying that because of those values of inclusivity in this case, you're essentially trumping the notion that the minyan needs to be made up of 10 Jews, right?
Yeah.
And what I mean to say is that there have to be changes to Judaism that flow from these new perspectives. Or they don't have to be, but there often are, particularly if one is open to them. And I'd been thinking earlier about technology in this respect as well, because I think that in a world in which Judaism doesn't mostly, in a world in which Judaism is mostly a matter of books and prayers and practices and getting together in a synagogue, then if you say, okay, well, on Shabbat, we don't use technology, we don't use electricity, that doesn't actually degrade your Jewish experience in any significant way, because your Jewish experience is not technologically based. It's actually the opposite. It may well enhance your Jewish experience. But if Judaism migrates more to an experience that people are having in technological environments, then it seems less clear to me that Shabbat should then be a day of rest from technology, right? That actually it may mean that to have the maximum Shabbat experience, it means, we actually have to reverse our stance on technology for Shabbat and say Shabbat is the day of the most technology, right? As long as it's this kind of technology or something along those lines. And it's interesting to me to look at that in relation to, I think, what some of the innovations relating to Shabbat in this sort of non-Orthodox community have been in recent years, such as, for example, Shabbat being a day of rest for your cell phone or something, putting your cell phone in a bag for Shabbat or for Friday night or whatever, so that you can rest from technology, which essentially accepts the existing frame, right, that says that the real Shabbat is this Shabbat that takes place in synagogues and whatnot. And I'm curious if you want to talk more about technology and the way that technology might change Judaism, or inclusivity and the way that might change Judaism, or really, like, where is the line between how these being open to these new values, to these new technologies, to these new opportunities should push changes in the nature of Jewish practice, versus to what extent should Jewish practice be limiting the effects of some of those other approaches?
The Sandra who entered rabbinical school in 2011 would never have used Snapchat on Shabbat. I'm not trying to say that I was Shomer Shabbat on Shabbat, but it just was not something that I could see myself doing. But now that as I move transition from rabbinical student to soon-to-be rabbi, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's also a rabbi. Rabbis work on Shabbat, and this is a way that I can use my platform as a rabbinical student / rabbi to bring Torah to people. So now I'm on Shabbat, I'm using Snapchat primarily to teach Torah.
For a long time, and maybe still for most Jewish institutions, the way they seem to be using the internet, social media, etc., is to advertise stuff that isn't on the internet. So the idea, and that's why when you start to talk about, screens in the service, not only is there the issue of it being Shabbat, but sometimes there's the issue of people they can't process, like, wait, the Judaism actually lives in the screen a little bit. Like, it's not like there's this hurdle where we think that Judaism only can live in the in-person. And I do think we're using the phrase technology to refer to digital stuff. But all technology means is invention. Like Dan said earlier on, scrolls were technology. And when we start to see it that way and we can have, say on Snapchat, a Torah portion that's not designed to get people to do anything next, but is actually the Judaism itself. Like, people could engage with your thoughts on Parshat Pinchas, and that could be their week of Torah. Like, there's no expectation that they go on and do anything else.
Why do you think the Orthodox are doing this well? Any sense? Have you looked into it? Why and the others aren't?
You look at all of these different websites, and I've been on the OU. I haven't been on the OU website in a couple of years, but just how forward they are. And I think within the Chabad framework, I think that it's designed for outreach. I'm not totally comfortable speaking for them, but I think that because they're designed to outreach, and I think that having that as their value system, they see social media as a way to do outreach. But the larger Orthodox community, I'm not sure why, but they have jumped on board. I was really surprised a few years ago at how innovative the OU website was. I don't know what it looks like now, because people can be on the front lines of digital technology and then find themselves like, if they don't keep adapting, now at the back of the line or whatever. So I don't know what their website looks like today, but in the beginning it was very forward thinking.
Last thing that I really wanted just to ask you to talk about a little was the question of economics. You've talked a lot about the cost of various things. And what do you say to organizations that, like a synagogue, that says, we actually can't afford, it's not that we don't want to shift to some other economic model, but it's that we just can't afford to. We wouldn't be able to pay our mortgage if we didn't charge $2,000 for dues or $3,000 for dues. We just don't know what to do.
First, I came from a synagogue that I believe is incredibly innovative. And one of the things that they didn't do, which was pretty radical then, maybe not so much now, is they refused, because they had the rabbi refused to do this. They refused to charge for high holiday seats, and they refused to have reserved seats. Now, every year there'd be this whole battle within the synagogue about why we do that. And this rabbi that I met when I first came to RRC, he was on our panel, and I was a younger, but pushed him on this whole idea of reserved seating and dues. We would rent space from a large church, take out all the Christian iconography, and create a synagogue in this church that could fit large amounts of people. And we even had when you have more people than they can fit in the sanctuary, we had an overflow room. And what we did was individual people would work with the rabbi to create high holiday appeals. So people telling their stories of why they joined the synagogue, why the synagogue is good for them. On any given Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're talking 900 to 1,000 people coming. Our synagogue at the time, I think, had 250 families. Because our rabbi believed that people need a place to go for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. On days where people need to go to synagogues shut their doors. Create environments for people who are already coming. When I sat on the board of our synagogue and we would start to have these conversations about, should we do reserved seating? Should we whatever? And the rabbi's like, that's my line in the sand. I'm not doing that. Our VP of finance or whomever had this role break down the numbers of money that we would get from high holiday appeals. people donating because they were happy and grateful that the door was open for them. And during these appeals, there would be like a, of course, donate whatever you can, but there was a suggested amount. And I think the number from those high holiday appeals that was coming in, I think it was around $40,000 just from people just donating. And this was the one time they would go. So they would probably, look at how much they would spend on dues or how valuable the service was or whatever, and they donate whatever they could. Yeah, so those are ways. I think by people sitting down with their synagogues and like, this isn't working, we need to find a better way.
Sandra, are there any other thoughts you have about any of the issues that have come up, or thoughts you have about paths moving forward for you as a rabbinical student and eventually a rabbi?
This is an exciting time to be a rabbinical student. And the gift that I have of being a rabbinical student is I get to try these things out as a student. And if they work, great. If they don't. And so I think I haven't necessarily taken the safe route as being a student, so that I hope that the stuff that I'm doing now, the chaplaincy, the technology, leading services, all those things will help me to make the choices I need to make once I graduate and become like a real rabbi.
Thank you again, Sandra, for coming on to the show. It's been a really, really great episode, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I was kind of nervous, but...
Well, it really didn't show. You were a great guest. And once again, for listeners, this is Sandra Lawson, rabbinical student at Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. And we always like to close out the show by encouraging our listeners to be in touch with us at Judaism Unbound. And there's a few ways for you to do that. First, you can always hit up our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. You can head to our website, JudaismUnbound.com. And you can always, and we really do enjoy when you send emails to Lex at nextjewishfuture.org and Dan at nextjewishfuture.org. And the last way that we would love for you to be in touch with us is by becoming a supporter of ours on Patreon. That's a website where you can make a small monthly contribution to our work so that we can keep doing what we do. And the website for that is www.patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Judaism Unbound. With that, this has been Judaism Unbound.